to please mute yourself unless you're speaking, or we will do that for you. Do not show any video unless you're speaking, just to save bandwidth for everyone. But if you are in the breakout room, we encourage you to use it. If you have a question during the presentation, then type it in the chat box. And if you have a question during the Q&A or during the sessions later, you can just raise your hands or unmute your microphone. It would be helpful for us if you can indicate your organization behind your name. You do it by going to the participant menu, selecting more, and then rename it at the organization name behind your name. A little disclaimer that this webinar is being recorded, and by participating, you are giving consent for this. And if you run into any technical problems or difficulties, please contact Ida Gabrielson in the chat. So a little bit of background very quickly to the Resilience Knowledge Coalition. It's a network of networks hosted by the Global Resilience Partnership and co-created with members and co-leads CDKN and ICCAT over the past year. Our purpose is getting the best resilience knowledge used, and we have a special focus on resilience measurement as we are building on the experience and expertise of the resilience measurement evidence and learning community of practice, which transitioned into the coalition earlier this year. We currently have over 400 members from more than 100 organizations, and we are funded by USAID and SIDA. We are assisted to the Adaptation Research Alliance and a proud supporter of the Race to Resilience. So what will we do today? This meeting aims to draw upon the collective expertise of the coalition members in developing the Race to Resilience framework. And that will be presented by Anja after my introduction. The framework is an advanced draft, as you should have seen, and you can download it, the presentation from the webinar website. And this meeting presents actually an exciting opportunity for you to contribute to its further development. To make sure that we have maximum participation, we have breakout rooms, and we will hear back from these breakout rooms and have some time for final Q&A after that. I will explain you now how you can assign yourself or how you can indicate which breakout room you are interested to join, so that we can divide you up while you are listening to Anja's presentation behind the scene, and so smooth this transition into that, making the best use of your and our time. So these breakout rooms, what are they about? The first one, called A on classification, hereby Race to Resilience, as you know, is classifying resilience based on hazard, geography, actions, and pillars, currently urban, rural, and coastal. And if you join the classification breakout room A, you can discuss if these classifications are sufficient and how they can be improved. In breakout room B on validation, I will be discussing validating outcomes reported by Race to Resilience initiatives, which is an unsolved aspect in the framework. And in this validation breakout group, the Race to Resilience would like to discuss with you this aspect and get insights on how you do validation yourself in your initiative. How do you validate outcomes? Do you use surveys, control groups, baselines, RCTs? Join that group to explore and contribute to learning. And then breakout room C on knowledge sharing. Race to Resilience is, as you know, keen to collaborate with our coalition members to share knowledge. And in this knowledge sharing breakout group C, we are exploring the best ways to do this. So join us there if you want to contribute and share some ideas there. And finally, on human-centric metrics, we are looking to discuss what are some of the methods by which we can convert human or people-centered metrics. For example, if an action is taken in a city, how many people can we then count as being made more resilient, and what does that mean? You can join this breakout room D or any of the other to lend your experience to further developing this Race to Resilience metrics framework. Before I hand over to Anja, I wanted to really briefly show how you can allocate yourself or how you can indicate which breakout room you're interested in. And to do that, you can just go here to the participants menu, little dot here, I don't know, I hope you can see my mouse, and then go into more and click that. And then you can select rename. When you do rename, you see this little menu here. And you can just simply add the letter that you're interested in from the breakout room in your in front of your name. And Suchi will paste the breakout groups and their names and the letters in the chat shortly. And then make sure to select OK. And when all that is done, you see this, hopefully with your own name, and you are ready to be allocated to the right breakout group. Here's a little bit of an overview of that. If you're calling in, or you cannot figure out, then just please indicate your name and your preferred breakout room letter in the chat, and we will sort you out. And if you still cannot figure it out, or if you end up in the wrong breakout room, then you can go back to the plenary and Ida will then sort you out. That's it for me for now. I'll be in Breakout Group C, and over to Anja. Stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Simone. I will just share screen myself. Great, hopefully you can see that now. Great, thank you. So yeah, as you introduced, we want to introduce to you today the Race to Resilience Metrics framework. And it is a draft at the moment, so it's hopefully a good time for us to hear your thoughts, so that we can incorporate changes and recommendations from this knowledgeable group. So during the session today, I'll just give a brief overview of who's here from our team, an introduction to the Race to Resilience itself, and then an introduction to the metrics framework. There'll be a few minutes for some clarification questions before we then go into the breakout groups, and then we'll all come back to the main group and have a longer Q&A session. So I'll just kind of put up those breakout groups again that Simone mentioned. So there's classification, validation, knowledge sharing, and human-centric metrics. So you can see on screen there, we've given a bit of an overview of what those four are, and they'll be moderated by members of our team. So as Simone mentioned, just put the letter before your name, and then we'll be into breakout groups later. So these breakout groups will be led by my colleagues on the call. So Daniela Benavente and Roxana Borges at the Center for Climate and Resilience Research in Chile, and CR2, that Center for Climate Resilient Research in Chile. They're the technical secretariat to the campaign. And also myself and Nidhi Upadhyaya, who are members of the Race Resilience team seconded in from the Adrian Arsht Centre for Resilience at the Atlantic Council in Nidhi's case, and then in my case from the Resilience Shift. And then the breakout group on knowledge sharing will be led by our colleagues Simone and Shuchi Vora as well. So just to give you an overview of the Race Resilience campaign itself, it's been launched by the high-level climate champions Nigel Toppy and Gonzalo Munoz in order to drive action by non-state actors to deliver a step change in global ambition for climate resilience. And the key thing is putting people and nature first. It's a sibling to the Race to Zero campaign, which has just celebrated its first year anniversary, with over 4,500 organizations that have committed to halving global emissions by 2030. And this campaign was launched at the start of this year. So at the moment we have 21 initiatives that have signed up, a variety of them, as you can see here on screen. There are about 1,500 members from the private sector and major NGOs as well. So I'd like to give you a bit of an intro to the metrics framework. That's kind of the focus of today's webinar. So our metrics framework is based on the IPCC conceptual framework of risk. The risk of climate-related impacts results from the interaction of hazards with the vulnerability and exposure of human and natural systems. So changes in both the climate system and socioeconomic processes, including adaptation and mitigation, are drivers of hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. And resilience results in the increased adaptation and reduces overall risk. And just to note, while we have set out definitions tailored to the campaign, these are not imposed on member initiatives. They accommodate a broad range and a broad spectrum of working definitions within the metrics framework. So the overall campaign goal is that by 2030, to catalyse action by non-state actors that builds the resilience of 4 billion people from groups and communities who are vulnerable to climate risks. So through carrying out activities such as those listed here, the campaign team hope to enable members of the initiatives to develop more ambitious pledges for increasing the resilience of individuals, companies, cities, countries or regions, and natural systems. And this will then lead to partner initiatives to the members of the partner initiatives, such as companies, investors, NGOs, etc., getting mobilized and taking action. And our theory of change that we've set out is that these will lead to outcomes for urban, rural, and coastal communities, contributing to that overall goal. So a metrics framework is really critical to the success of the campaign, and we have several aims for this metrics framework. We want it to enable ambitious campaign goals from all of the initiatives and to mobilize action. We want to use it to record and track pledges and outcomes. We want to use it to be able to identify gaps that need to be filled by new and existing initiatives. And we want to ensure that the data is reliable and the impact of the campaign is credible. But beyond this, we also think that there's a space that it could potentially fill by becoming a more widely adopted measurement framework to support engagement by businesses, investors, and other key actors. But there are some challenges to this, which you'll all no doubt be well aware of. And these include the fact that resilience is a pretty complex, multifaceted concept covering a range of hazard types, socioeconomic circumstances, and units of engagement. And there's no real consensus on the definitions of resilience or other key concepts like adaptation, with numerous versions being used by different actors. So that's why we wanted to make sure that the framework it holds space for a wide variety of those definitions rather than imposing it on the initiatives. Also, there's not really a universally agreed measurement approach for resilience or for attributing resilience to a project or program activities. And there are significant barriers for non-specialist actors in effectively measuring resilience and adaptation. And these were all things we were keenly aware of when we put together this framework. And it formed the framework design requirements that we had. So what the framework does not do, I suppose this is kind of key to set the boundaries of what we're hoping that this metrics framework does. So it doesn't provide an exhaustive list of climate resilience metrics under each high-level outcome. Neither does it aggregate the depth of resilience across initiatives, i.e. how much more resilient is an individual or a city, and nor does it act as a policing mechanism or central authority on resilience reporting. The campaign uses the gaps between need, pledges, and validated outcomes to assess the resilience gap. The need mentioned here comes from a global analysis done by McKinsey that identified populations exposed to 4 key hazards. Those were heat stress, acute and chronic, agricultural drought, urban water stress, and flooding, both riverine and coastal. So this analysis assessed slow and rapid onset climate hazards integrated with socioeconomic data sources on a 5 by 5 kilometre level to quantify exposure of populations of varying levels of vulnerability to one or more of those climate hazards at a subnational scale globally. So we intend to make this data available separately. And what we included here is just to show that we want to use it as a reference point to understand what the gaps are by initiative type, by geography, by focus hazard. So the analysis that I just mentioned here, it won't be the primary driver of action, but it'll just be a reference point. And we also intend to engage with initiatives to identify the main drivers of a validation gap and to ultimately work with initiatives to close any gaps that are needed through the initiative projects. In addition, we'll work to develop campaign level foundations for investment and action where there's sufficient level of interest and potential for impact as well. So the framework captures initiative results through input, outcome, and pledge metrics. So an input is a resource used by an initiative to undertake climate resilience activities, such as an active project. An outcome is the product, goods, or service generated by those activities. And these are driven by the pledges made by initiatives to increase climate resilience due to the provision of outcomes. So resilience is captured at an outcome level rather than an impact level, and this encourages initiatives to pledge and directly report resilience based on outcomes. And one thing to note here is that increased resilience is initiative and context specified, and I'll come back to what we mean by increased resilience. So before that, I just wanted to show you this kind of overview, the metrics that we have developed for the campaign. And the key one is resilient individuals. And you'll remember that our overall goal for the campaign is that by 2030, we want to catalyse action by non-state actors that builds the resilience of 4 billion people from groups and communities who are vulnerable to climate risks. So that's why resilient individuals is the flagship outcome. So we're also measuring companies, countries and regions, cities and natural systems as well. So the pledge, outcome and input metrics form a framework providing multiple reporting options for initiatives. So initiatives are only reporting on the relevant metrics in the framework, understanding that they need to report again at least one of the outcome metrics here in blue. You'll see that there are also two kind of additional metrics just on the side, finance mobilized and knowledge created and adopted, as these are seen as key enablers of resilience as well. So the campaign plans to publicly report selected metrics through a high-level dashboard at COP and then every year beyond that as well, up to 2030. I mentioned that I'd come back to what, counts as resilience actions, and we're aware that increased resilience is pretty initiative and context specific, and the Race to Resilience campaign is not specifying exactly how to define it. Each initiative can have its own theory of change for climate resilience. But for metric collection, compilation, and aggregation purposes, and so that we can be in a position to get meaningful insights from the initiative metrics, we are asking initiatives to assign their outcome-related actions into either the 9 Marrakesh Partnership climate actions or the 10 IPCC AR5 actions typologies. And I won't go into detail of these due to lack of time, but happy to share links afterwards if that would be helpful. But the 10 IPCC action typologies are categorized in terms of structural, physical, social, and institutional. And then the Marrakesh Partnership climate actions encompass groups such as climate risk vulnerability assessments, early warning systems, climate proofing infrastructure, and more as well. So they're both quite broad, I think it's fair to say. So the campaign scope and the types of activities that are captured are clarified in this slide. We're looking at direct resilience, not indirect resilience. So for example, a project that's focused on resilience or a project with resilience embedded will contribute to the campaign, but a project that's not targeting resilience, such as a development focused project or program support that increases local incomes, reduces poverty, or improves infrastructure, but doesn't explicitly target climate shocks and stresses, that will not be included. We're also counting both sustained and active resilience. I like sustained, you can see on the slide here, it's transformational adaptation, which more permanently alters structural conditions and processes. And we're counting active as well, which would be something contingent on an ongoing project. So just to note quickly on double counting, to accurately measure impact, the Race to Resilience metrics offer guidance to minimize different types of double counting. We're aware that some double counting of individuals and small and medium enterprises is unavoidable, but we have some guidance in place for large companies, cities and organizations, and that we hope that by holding a master list, we will endeavour to avoid double counting. Another thing to note just in advance of the breakout groups on classifications. So we are classifying or tagging human counts of resilience based on hazard, geography, actions, as I mentioned previously, the Marrakesh or AR5, pillars, i.e. urban, rural, coastal, and then in the breakout group, Daniela will lead discussion on these classifications lead a further kind of discussion on this. And just another final note before we go into breakout groups on validation. So this is how we have set up the validation on the metrics framework at the moment. So initiatives have to assess that the action that they have taken is relevant to either the Marrakesh or AR5 actions. And alignment to those infers an evidence base that these activities will actually build resilience in the recipient group. Outcomes from those are assumed to increase resilience, and then initiatives will be asked to report validated outcomes by validating the link to the Marrakesh or AR5 actions, the delivery and adoption of action, and then thirdly, the resilience outcome of the recipient group. And this third step is encouraged but not a requirement. And this is particularly what we're interested in discussing today. Methods to do that is something that we would really like to explore in that breakout group. So I think we have a couple of minutes for clarification questions, if anything is unclear, before we move into the breakout groups. I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat, but maybe Simone, if there's anything that needs to be covered quickly before we move into breakout groups, let me know.
Yeah, thank you, Anya. And maybe I'll take over screen sharing so that we can put on the instructions for the on how to join the breakout rooms. And there was one final question from Stacy. Where would we find the guidance on double counting? Maybe you can answer that one.
Sure. Yeah. So the double counting, we've set it out in the framework that we would accept double counting on an individual level, but we will hold a master list for large companies, for cities, and for organizations. And then we will do a cross-check to see if more than one initiative has reported against those categories. And when we finalize this metrics framework, we will be issuing to all of the initiatives the overview document, which will lay out some of that detail, and also a template for them to report the data as well. And also we'll be hoping to make that public as well for anyone else who's interested.
Thank you very much. I think that was it for now. I think I suggest we go into the breakout rooms, because we have people from Race Resilience in each of them. You can have your questions, share your thinking and thoughts, and then we'll come back here again to discuss and report back and hear back from the breakout rooms. So let's get interactive. Suchi, you can split us up, and then for those of you who are not yet allocated to the group, don't worry. The instructions are here on the screen, and if you just hang back, then you can tell Ida which group you would like to join, and she will send you there. Okay, hope to see you soon. Not sure if we have everyone back yet. I hope the breakout rooms were engaging and interesting for all of you. If your sound is okay, I think, and your video is okay, then feel free to leave on your video. We're just going to invite now real quickly to ask each of the groups to report back if we have everyone. 38, I think that's almost everyone. Suchi, do we have everyone? Ida?
Yes, everyone should be back.
Perfect. And Suchi, are you recording again? Okay. Yes. Perfect. Okay, over to group A. Please let us hear what you discussed.
That would be me, Simone. But I'm wondering if anyone from my group would rather do it. Maybe Carter. I'd love to hear your views rather than hear me.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi, Simone. I understand the basic Marrakesh framework and the IPCC framework, but I'm still a little bit baffled by the sequence of the sequence that gets to outcomes. The outcomes seem to me rather binary. And what I mean by binary is at the end of the day, a farmer is either has reduced resilience to drought or not. And that reduced resilience to drought could be because of irrigation, or it could be because of insurance, it could be services, etc. And it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's a yes, no decision on the outcome. So we sort of got into the weeds a little bit on what is the data behind these measures? Is it simply saying, yes, that farmer has served or not? Or is there a better measure of the level of risk and the level of risk reduction? So we were having a good discussion, but I feel I'm still a little confused. Thanks.
Was that a good summary, Daniela? Yeah, I think it was interesting at least.
I think it was, because actually we spent most of the time me sort of explaining the cross-tagging that we were hoping to have on the human metric, and how we relate that with exposure. I think that my impression from the discussion we had is that people is not used to be thinking in terms of relating resilience to exposure that directly. And so that was interesting, actually, to the challenge of sort of explaining how we are thinking about this framework. Yeah.
If I may add, sorry, it was not really discussing the group, but the thing that you're mentioning now, Daniela, on linking resilience with exposure, I think it's a bit weird, actually, because we're usually saying that we're building resilience because we're increasing capacities, not only reducing exposure, or not only counting who was exposed and who's less exposed now, just because exposure is also related to location and geographic location. And we have way more things to assess in order to, that is not only where you are located and in the face of what you need to build, which capacities, so you're in a better position to, we say, prevent, anticipate, absorb, etc. So it's not just, where you are located geographically in the face of a potential hazard. So I think it's a bit tricky. And yeah, what I was commenting in the group is that I feel that at least in the classification, we're just giving a formula to put together like output statements. And I feel that that is not enough, but maybe there's something else that I am not yet aware because I'm not familiar with the rest of the metrics that is being proposed. Thank you, and over.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think that's a really good point. I think we would love if we had a global measure of adaptive capacity that we could compare against, but we don't have anything quite like that. So we kind of, I suppose, compromise to compare to exposure, even though, as you say, it's not the whole story.
And I'm also guessing a lot of the story gets told both in terms of binary versus continuous, the extent of improved resilience and which is your target group by validation. Carl, is your point on that, or should we, you want to?
Related, if I just may say, Carl Schultz, I'm the chair of the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics. And we're working right now to develop a framework under which we can map and evaluate metrics. You're all welcome to join. Adaptationmetrics.org is the URL. But the comment I was going to make is that in the work that we've done so far, it seems like what could be defined as principles, what could be defined as lenses, are going to be very important in how we make whatever metrics we do clear. And so what we're considering right now is how we can have user needs, clarity of definitions and taxonomy, how we can have a systems approach perspective always caught up in this, and also how we can make sure that information becomes, or rather data becomes information that's usable, has value. So we're trying to outline these things in those lenses. And I would just urge that even though we're never going to agree on what's the perfect metric, and there's no perfectly aggregable number, and you're doing, I think, a very good job of working towards something that can serve as a proxy of that. But if you're clear about this, and if we have a common understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and what these metrics really mean and what they don't mean, then I think we're at least half of the way there. So I'd urge us to be productive and not give up the effort because we're never going to get it right, but to move on. And I hope that that's helpful in just framing how we can proceed.
Thank you, Carl. No, I agree. Very helpful. And I look forward to working with you on the AMME program and learning more about that. And I'm sure the Race to Resilience colleagues will as well. Let me go to Group B on validation. Who's reporting back on that? Nidhi.
Somehow that'll be me, yes. So very quickly, we went in with 3 questions. We came out with a lot more from the group, but it was a great discussion, valuable inputs. I think the first thing to understand was that validating resilience overall will be a process of validating the smaller elements that lead up to building that resilience to say that something has been validated. I think there was a good discussion on quantitative and qualitative, both being critical elements of the validation process, because while you have, and we use the examples of the farmer insurance, that you have a number of say 10,000 people getting the insurance policy, but we need to do more than just counting that number and saying that they are protected. There has to be more depth in understanding the quality of insurance they're getting. Is the insurance actually harming them or benefiting them? And then also in the same example, understanding the full ecosystem in which that insurance policy has been implemented, so that we understand that in that ecosystem, that farmer is actually being more resilient. So I'll invite Roxana or any other members of our group to jump in if I missed anything, but that was just a large overview that we discussed.
Thank you, Nidhi. There's nothing else. I'd go to Suchi now because we're short on time. 2 minutes, Suchi. Max. 1.
Just super quickly. Yeah, so basically we were a group that was discussing knowledge sharing, essentially trying to understand if the way the Race to Resilience, what are the ways in which Race to Resilience can collaborate with the Resilience Knowledge Coalition, and you know, the Knowledge Coalition being a network of networks, how then therefore the various networks that are associated with the Resilience Knowledge Coalition can therefore collaborate with Race to Resilience. So yeah, just very quickly, what was highlighted in our group was the need to connect regularly, essentially two-way connections, webinars, meetings, etc. Mappings and meta-analysis to track events, to track who else is in this space, what else is happening, with especially in the run-up to COP26. And basically a discussion of knowledge sharing both within certain networks and between networks, so between multiple networks. So there was conversation around a central space to store information, evidence generated, so that can be shared across networks and can be communicated. Again, yes, more webinars, maybe Race to Resilience can possibly conduct more webinars, and yeah, basically just
Thanks, Suchi, and I think that was helpful. And also, I think it's not even maybe more webinars, because there's quite a lot of them, but finding the spaces where these webinars are, so that you can find the webinars that you're interested to attend. And now, I mean, trees, forests, we often don't know where we are. So see if there's maybe a way, a bit of meta-analysis and mapping can be done there, which will align a lot with Carl Schultz's work on the ICANN and the mapping. The final group, because I think Group D, we have a few more minutes, and then maybe some closing remarks. You can do the closing remarks immediately.
Thanks, Simone. Actually, I'm going to hand over to Felipe to feedback from our group.
Hi, everyone. I got a lot of notes, but I would say that in summary, there is a lot of things that should be reviewed in the process of making sure that it's human-centric metrics. And for instance, at the beginning of this discussion, we talked about what is more important for the people. That should we know everything about the people beforehand? So, for instance, Yunad Hassan said that they did a lot of interviews. In one example, he mentioned about Pakistan. Another thing we discussed about was about the threshold, that what is enough for the people. When do they say that it's going to be resilient or not? And that could be changing from person to person. Some people would say, okay, this is good enough for me, and other people would say that's not enough. So that threshold is really something. And to discuss, for instance, if we are dealing with a household or a community, it's really case to case. So it's really difficult to define only one metric to all of them. So it's really a case-to-case scenario. So the discussion was really good in that sense. What else? I think that's the broad view. I don't know if you want to add something more, Anya.
Thanks, Felipe. Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. The need for a participatory approach was definitely something that we discussed a lot. And yeah, just on some closing remarks, just to say thank you so much to everybody for all of your feedback and for attending today. If you have any additional thoughts on the presentation or on what was discussed in the breakout groups, please do email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And let us know what you think. Our kind of timeline is that we'll be finalizing the framework over the next few weeks, and then we'll make it public as well after this year. So after COP, we will then be doing another review of the metrics framework to make sure that to improve it, to see what could have worked better. So any kind of comments won't be just limited to the next few weeks. We'll also think about them at the end of this calendar year as well.
Thank you, Anya. I think that was great. That's a wrap, everyone. Indeed, you can download the presentation and the background materials from the event website, and there you can read through. If you have comments, feel free to share them with us. We can forward to Anya as well, or share it with Anya directly. I think it was exciting. I think we can probably have another call on this probably after the European summer. Wishing you all, if I don't see you again, a great break. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you.